On January 12, 2023, CBS News Minnesota aired a 24-second clip of the death of gray-haired old man Donald Blome. He died on January 10, 2023, at the age of 73 from natural causes consistent with age. But who was this old man who made it into the news summary? Donald Blome is a brutal maniac and criminal who served a life sentence in prison and despite his deeds died his death. Donald Blome's death brings to an end a long-running saga of violence and depravity that began in the 1970s and saw him commit a series of heinous crimes, culminating in the brutal murder of Katie Poirier. Despite his long history of violence, Blome managed to evade justice for years until a chance encounter led to his capture and punishment. He began his crime spree in 1975 when he kidnapped a young girl. The pervert gagged her and took advantage of her, then locked her in the trunk of his car, but the girl was not timid, and she managed to escape and later handed over to the police criminal. Blome was tried and found guilty, but the punishment was too lenient, and in 1978, when he was free, he again committed aggravated assault. In 1983, he was arrested for criminal sexual conduct. That same year, he threatened two young girls in a remote area with a knife, tied them to a tree and stuffed socks in their mouths. He choked and revived one of them several times and repeated that he was going to do something terrible to them. The girls were rescued when a police patrol saw their improperly parked car and responded quickly to find the owner. Blome then fled into the woods and later changed his appearance by dyeing his hair. He was arrested 2 months later. When one of the girls recognized him, he pleaded guilty to the crime, but the newly received punishment did not reform him. During an examination in 1992, the psychologist concluded that without close supervision and monitoring, Blome would resume antisocial behavior in the near future. Antisocial behaviors are actions that are harmful or disregard the mental state of others, which is exactly the state the psychologist predicted Donald would be in. However, Blome managed to change his name, get a job, and get married. By May 1999, he had 6 felony convictions on his record, 5 of which involved kidnapping and violence. But who is Donald Blome, and where does the cruelty and desire to dominate others come from in an ordinary man? Let's get to the bottom of it, because perhaps the answer lies in the man's rather troubled early years. Donald Alban Blome was born on February 5, 1949, in the state of Minnesota. He was an American by nationality. Blome had a troubled childhood as he was often abused by his father from his early age until his teenage years. By then, Donald Blome was already drinking heavily and exhibiting behavioral problems, and in 10th grade he went to a reform school where he often skipped classes. The trauma of a violent relationship with his father is likely what led him to develop behavioral and alcohol problems. This was especially evident as he entered puberty. But let's take a closer look at this story through the eyes of a mentally healthy person and ponder where the chain of events that led to the man's disappearance broke down. On May 26, 1999, Caitlin Poirier was working the night shift alone at a convenience store at a service station. After midnight, a customer of the store called the police to report that the clerk was gone. Police officers who arrived on the scene found the store was indeed empty. They checked the surveillance video and saw a large man holding Katie by the neck lead her out of the store around 11:40 p.m. He was wearing jeans, a backwards baseball cap, and a New York Yankees jersey with the number 23 on the back. The fragile young woman was apparently forced out of the store. Catherine Honeck, an employee of the Subway restaurant that was next to the store from which the girl disappeared, was questioned by police. She said that shortly before the Subway store closed around 10 p.m., she saw a man acting strangely. After closing, Honeck drove home, and coincidentally, she encountered the man who was leaving the store on the road. She noted that the stranger was driving a black Ford F-150 pickup truck with an extended cab with white markings on the side. The pickup truck looped around the maintenance area several times before entering Moose Lake and stopping in the parking lot of a local cafe. Honeck also reported that Kathy's car was still in the parking lot when she left work. Based on her description and partially recovered surveillance camera footage, a rough sketch of the kidnapper was made. He had long blonde hair and appeared to be about 25 years old. A composite sketch was made from 4 witness statements and was broadcast on local television and placed in local newspapers asking for information. While clues were being gathered, hundreds of people arrived from across the state to help circle the wooded area around the station in search of the kidnapped Kathy Poirier. Police used service dogs and helicopters, but found nothing. Posters of Kathy appeared in many newspapers and on billboards throughout the region, turning her story into a high-profile missing persons case. The local sex offender facility, which was located near the store where Katie went missing, reported that all inmates were accounted for. The information provided was accurate, which completely ruled out a kidnapping by a fugitive offender. Police officers began searching for the vehicle by license plate number and came up with Donald Blome. But unfortunately, the truck in his driveway was white in color. On June 6, 1999, the official search ended without success, but many volunteers continued to look for the girl. They believed that at least someone somewhere had seen something that would make the right connection and bring the girl home. Whether the perpetrator was brave or foolish for daring to take the girl out of a store equipped with a security camera, investigators were looking for at least one more mistake he would make. The searchers emphasized the neighborhood itself. After all, if the perpetrator was in this fairly remote area at night and returned to the store twice, it was likely that he knew the area very well, which meant that someone must have seen the man before the crime. A search headquarters was set up at the Lutheran Church in Moose Lake, with staff members assisting in processing leads and volunteers handing out flyers describing Katie. On the wall were maps with large crosses marking the areas that searchers had already traversed. But despite the efforts and hopes of many, Katie never turned up, suggesting that the kidnapper might be an athlete or a fan of the New York Yankees team. The police sought the help of a sports figure. 2 weeks passed, but still no result. The police asked Minnesota Twins legend Paul Molitor to make a public service announcement. His appeal to Minnesotans across the state caught the attention of Darrell Brown, who worked at the Minnesota Veterans Home. On June 18th, he called the hotline to report his co-worker Donald Hutchinson, who had recently stopped driving his black pickup truck and was described as looking like a composite sketch. He had been absent the day after the abduction and had recently gotten a haircut. Investigation revealed that Donald Hutchinson was actually Donald Blome and had a black pickup truck carefully hidden in his garage. He also owned property 12 miles from the store in Moose Lake where Kathy worked. During further digging, investigators learned that Blome had been convicted of sex crimes, specifically kidnapping petite young girls like Katie. Detectives worked quickly to get a search warrant. Agents from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension went looking for Blome and found him and his family at a campground 140 miles outside of Richfield. Agents woke him up early in the morning to ask him some questions. He was brought in for questioning. Further inspection revealed that Blome had purchased property in Moose Lake about 2 years ago. Neighbors confirmed that he had been there frequently before Katie's abduction, but had not been there since. Blome's supervisor at the veterans' home said he was unaware of the man's criminal record because he used the name Hutchinson. He said Blome always kept to himself and didn't socialize much with people. After his arrest, Donald Blome was friendly and cooperative, but then he refused to testify and asked for an attorney. Meanwhile, authorities organized a series of searches that left them in shock. Various items were seized from Blome's home, but no official statement was given as to what the items were or how they figured in the investigation. Another search was conducted on Blome's 20-acre property in Moose Lake, involving more than 100 National Guard members and several hundred volunteers. They marched several miles from his property into the woods, but as darkness fell, they had to leave. The next morning, the search resumed with renewed vigor, and Katie's mother said she had a gut feeling that they would find her daughter alive. Apparently, some hoped the girl was being held somewhere against her will, but the sheriff was less optimistic. On the morning of the second day, searchers found bone-like fragments among the ashes in a fire pit on Donald Blom's property. They were sent to the lab for further testing, and to everyone's shock, they were identified as bone fragments, and a tooth found in the ashes was also sent to odontologists, experts in dental remains. Certified forensic dentist Dr. Ann Norlander conducted a time-consuming and expensive examination of the tooth. She knew that under the conditions under which it was extracted, any DNA that could have been extracted from the pulp of the tooth would have been destroyed, so she had to resort to other methods. When she came across something that looked like a filling, it confirmed that it was a human tooth and allowed her to determine if it could have belonged to Katie. Dental fillings are made up of an organic matrix and an inorganic filler. The organic matrix burns away, leaving behind particles of the filler. This allows the analyst to identify a brand, or at least a group of brands. Manufacturers use as many as 50 different types of fillers, any one of which will show up vividly on dental x-rays. The composition of the filling of the tooth from Blom's fire pit matched the composition of the fillings used for Katie. In addition, researchers were able to identify it as tooth 18 and determine that it belonged to a young woman. The likelihood that it had once been in Kathy's mouth and not someone else from the area was quite high. One major question remains unanswered. Why did the perpetrator get out of prison after kidnapping 7 different girls? If the justice system had worked better, Katie might still be alive. Instead, Blom was able to change his name and shake off the stain of his criminal past, get a job, get married, and become a new identity as a cover to continue causing harm. In the case of Katie Poirier, Blom was charged with kidnapping and unlawful possession of a firearm, which is a federal charge. Given his prior convictions, Blom was not allowed to carry a firearm. He was offered a plea agreement, but he didn't want to even talk. But then he changed his mind and said he was willing to testify, with the condition that he call home. On September 8th, Blom made a tearful confession that lasted 2.5 hours. He said that on that day, May 26, 1999, he went fishing and then drove home to Richfield. Later that evening, however, he returned to his home on Moose Lake. On the way, he stopped to buy liquor and have a beer at a bar. He saw Kathy in the store while she was doing business. He did not know her, but grabbed her and forcibly put her in his pickup truck. He then drove her to his motorhome. "I don't know if it was just out of guilt or something else or because I felt stupid," he said, "but then I strangled her and killed her." He strangled her from behind, saying it took about 20 minutes. He did not admit to any other type of assault. Once he knew she was dead, Blom placed her body in a fire pit in the fetal position and then gathered wood and paper to make it burn. But Blom's account clearly contradicted the video camera footage and the discovery in the burn pit. Blom claimed that he remembered her asking him several times to let her go, although she did not struggle with him until he began choking her on his property. He said he managed to kill her with his bare hands. His account of burning the remains was also not realistic enough, as wood and paper alone could not have reached a high enough temperature to turn a human body to ashes. When prodded, he admitted that none of this made much sense to him. He just didn't know why he did it. When the interview was over, Blom called 2 local television stations to report what he had done and asked that the reporters leave his family alone. The deal also returned confiscated property to his wife, Amy Blom, including a parcel of land on Moose Lake, a home in Richfield in the family car. For the Poirier family, the confession was devastating because they had hoped Kathy was still alive. Blom now claimed that she had been murdered and cremated for no reason other than his nocturnal impulse, which he could not explain. Blom soon recanted, saying he made a false confession due to the stress of solitary confinement and the medication he was taking. He said he was hallucinating and believed the only way to escape from the cell was to tell the authorities what they wanted to hear. But he was out of his mind, he now claimed, and didn't know what he was saying. The plea bargain had been canceled, and lawyers for both sides were preparing for trial. There are different types of false confessions, and sometimes people just spontaneously confess to something they did not do. This usually happens in response to a high-profile case. Some people expect the interrogation to be too intense, so they quickly succumb to the pressure to confess. But there is another type of phenomenon that can occur. People may internalize assertions of guilt from the police and come to believe that they have committed a crime that they were not involved in. Whether Blome actually confessed to perjury or recanted his testimony is now for the jury to decide. Blome was brought to trial. The trial began in June 2000 and took 5 weeks for jury selection. The trial took another 5 weeks, during which more than 50 witnesses, including several key witnesses, were called to testify. The case was opened by Carleton County Assistant Prosecuting Attorney Thomas Pertler. Among the first witnesses, Blome's brother testified that he had given the family a box of old clothes, including a New York Yankees jersey. Blome had previously said he had never owned such a shirt. Even more damaging was the testimony of 2 women whom Blome kidnapped in 1983, who agreed to testify about how he treated them. The jury learned firsthand what he was capable of. Both women, being young girls at the time, looked like Kathy. Forensic odontologists then confirmed that the partial tooth matched Kathy's age, gender, and dental records. Dr. Ann Nordlander admitted that at first she was not sure it was even a tooth. At the hearing, she testified that with a reasonable degree of medical certainty, the tooth belonged to Kathy. It was the discovery of chemicals in the filling material that led her to that conclusion. A surveillance video from another store that captured Blome back in May showed that around the time of the kidnapping, his hair, now gray, had blonde tips, as his barber confirmed, making him look younger. Most revealing was Blome's confession, which the judge allowed into evidence. Each juror was given a transcript for further review. Thereafter, there was silence in the courtroom, save for the quiet sobs of Kathy's relatives. The case against Blome seemed pretty strong at that point. Rodney Broughton, lead defense attorney, called his first witness on August 7th. Amy Blum testified that her husband was home the night Katie disappeared. Speaking from the bench, she said she guessed where her husband was that day because she saw a broadcast the next day about the girl's disappearance. She called attention to it because the location of her disappearance was near the country house they owned on Moose Lake, 110 miles from their home. Because Blome had a criminal record, she figured he would be a suspect, so she later realized exactly where he had been the night before. Blome returned home at 9:30 p.m., and they had already gone to bed. When his spouse woke up in the morning, coffee was ready, his spouse was home. She also testified that the police officers bullied her, threatening to take her children away if she didn't answer questions the way they wanted her to. "They called me a liar," she said. She also denied that she had ever seen a baseball jersey in the clothes her son-in-law gave them, and said she had never seen her husband wear one. As she spoke, Blome wept, visibly wiping his eyes. On August 10th, Blome took the stand in his own defense. Under oath, he denied that he had kidnapped Kathy Poirier. He remained on the witness stand for more than 3 hours, alternately talking and crying. He claimed that his life was falling apart, and he felt ill at the time he admitted to the investigation that he had committed the crime. He added that his wife was threatening to leave his life due to media pressure, so he decided to do everything he could to free himself from the cell he was imprisoned in. He spent quite a bit of time trying to get the jury to feel sorry for him, as if he was the victim. He agreed that he had made a confession, but said he had also recanted it. He now claimed that he was not at Moose Lake the night of the crime, but rather he was sleeping at home with his wife, as she had told him. Although he had been fishing there earlier in the evening, he was home at 10 p.m., well before Katie was taken from the store. Later on cross-examination, Blome was forced to admit the lies and inconsistencies in his statements to the police at the beginning of the investigation, so appearing in court did him no good. To many, he appeared to be a whiner trying to get away with it once again. When the questioning ended, Blome looked frustrated. He turned to the judge, cursed, and asked if he could only make one statement. After a negative answer, the case went to the jury. After 10 hours of deliberation, 3 of which were spent replaying the taped confessions, the jury found Donald Blome guilty. He received a life sentence without parole. Blome continued to insist that it wasn't over and predicted that one day he would be exonerated. "I never killed anyone," he insisted. He was sure he had a strong case for appeal. But in 2004, the appeals court issued an 81-page ruling that upheld the conviction. Although his trial was not perfect, the judges decided it had been fair. They saw no reason to overturn the ruling or order a new trial. The murder of Caitlin Poirier led to the passage of Katie's Law, which included the development of a statewide computerized crime-fighting network, tightening the requirements for tracking predatory sex offenders like Blome. A complex crime. The incident that occurred in late summer 2016 at Spring Creek Park sparked a wave of public outrage. How many similar tragedies must happen before New York City authorities listen to the citizens' pleas? Local residents had repeatedly alerted authorities about the presence of unsettling individuals in the park. Some of them would gather in groups while others wandered alone. Either way, their appearance evoked a sense of danger. Regrettably, it took a crime for the city administration to finally take action and address this issue. Additionally, the event led to numerous discussions and topics about the safety of female runners, particularly those who exercise alone. According to a survey, 54% of women feel anxious when they go out, fearing they might be subjected to verbal harassment or physical attacks. The story of Karina Vetrano is both horrifying and baffling. Firstly, because nothing seemed amiss on the day of the fateful event. The attack on the woman occurred in broad daylight, in a fairly populated area. Secondly, her death has a mystical aspect to it. And thirdly, the investigation of the case, as well as the sentencing of the perpetrator, raised many questions. On Tuesday, August 2nd, 2016, Karina arranged to meet her father after work. They wanted to spend time together. Since Miss Vetrano had moved, family gatherings had become rare because everyone was busy with their own things. In addition, the young woman was combining 2 jobs. Philip picked up his daughter and took her to his home. There, the family shared their impressions of the past week. When Karina was about to go home, she asked her father if he wanted to go jogging with her, as they often did, covering several miles together. Her father replied that he couldn't this time. "You see, my back hurts so badly that nothing helps. Maybe a new prescription is needed. Or maybe it's the change in the weather," Mr. Vetrano explained. "Maybe I should call you a cab." The weather was beautiful, the heat had abated, and there was a fresh smell in the air. Therefore, Karina declined the offer. Besides, she was training for the upcoming marathon. The young woman had recently broken up with her boyfriend and wanted to distract herself. A jog would clearly do her good. That evening was the last time the parents saw their youngest daughter. At 5:45 p.m., she left the house for a jog. Her first stop was Spring Creek Park, a cozy, tranquil place buried in greenery. A true paradise amongst the city's infrastructure. However, only part of the park was available for walking. The rest was covered with thickets and swamps. Mr. Vetrano asked his daughter to stick to her usual route, to stay away from unfamiliar paths and people. Unfortunately, Karina ignored his advice. In search of solitude, she decided to go to a grassy, deserted place. Karina's thoughts were abruptly interrupted. She felt a sharp pain in the back of her head, and she fell down. This rash decision cost the young woman her life. A frightening uncertainty entered the Vetrano home. It had been 2 hours since they had said goodbye to their youngest daughter. She should have been home by now, or at least answering the calls of her parents, who were frantically trying to reach her. and she had promised to keep her cell phone to herself. The anxiety was growing. Her father sensed that something was wrong and decided to seek help from his neighbor, the chief of the New York City Police Department. They were on good terms, and the high-ranking official knew that Philip would not make a fuss over nothing. After that, Karina Vetrano was reported missing. Police began searching for the young woman, combing the park area and surrounding streets. As a result, experienced canine units were brought in. As it is known, the first 24 hours after the disappearance of a person are crucial and most informative. Therefore, law enforcement utilized all available resources before nightfall. At the same time, Mr. Vetrano, along with a group of volunteers, searched for his daughter on his own. He scoured the park from end to end, combing the paths and wading through the tall grass, all the while making phone calls. As dusk fell, the man noticed a light in the grass. As he approached, he recognized Karina's phone. Maybe she lost her cell phone and just didn't let us know. Philip hoped. The patriarch of the family headed toward the police officers, deciding to pick his way through the thicket. Stepping into the grass, he came across something soft. A partially undressed female corpse lay face down. Philip turned it over and saw a familiar face. A desperate scream burst from his father's chest. It was Karina. She hadn't lost her phone like he thought. His little girl wasn't answering her phone because she had been robbed of her life. The realization of what had happened overwhelmed Mr. Vetrano. Hearing the screaming and yelling, the police rushed to him. They dragged Philippe away from his daughter's body, trying to explain that this was now a crime scene. Anything in the area was considered evidence. To prevent the evidence from being tampered with, the law enforcement officers asked the father of the deceased not to touch anything. On the way home, Mr. Vetrano thought a lot. He was tormented by how to tell his wife about their daughter's death. Images of the past flashed before his eyes. He remembered how on July 12, 1986, in Queens, their second daughter was born. Philip had been proud of her from an early age. She was obedient and well-mannered. He vividly remembered taking her to her first day of school, how well she did in her studies. Such education enabled her to earn a higher degree. Karina graduated from St. John's University with a master's degree in speech pathology. She had always dreamed of helping children and worked with autistic kids. His daughter was multifaceted. She loved to travel and write. She adored sports, especially running. Their shared passion brought them closer. She was his inspiration. The father remembered how jealously he treated her suitors. He so wanted her to be truly loved, hoping that she would eventually create a strong family like he and Kathy had, and give him wonderful grandchildren. The return journey turned into an eternity. At the entrance to the house, Mr. Vetrano paused, taking a deep breath. "I need to be strong to support my family. I have to pull myself together," the man commanded himself. His wife met him at the threshold. Fortunately, he didn't need to explain anything to her. She understood everything from her husband's face. Kathy cried, approached her husband, and hugged him. Soon, Karina's relatives and friends learned of the incident. They struggled to recover from the shock. Believing in the sudden death of the young woman was hard, let alone accepting its violent nature. Miss Vetrano had been subjected to a brutal attack. This was the conclusion reached by investigators. At first glance, it was obvious that the woman had resisted. Even in death, her fists remained clenched. Bruises and abrasions were found on her once young and healthy body, and her athletic clothing was torn. The autopsy showed that the back of the victim's skull had been damaged by a blunt object, probably a stone. However, the cause of death was asphyxiation. A clear mark was visible on the woman's neck. The forensic examination also revealed the intimate nature of the crime: violence. The experts' findings confirmed the police's initial suspicions. Earth and grass were found under the victim's fingernails, probably in an attempt to free herself from her attacker's grip and escape. Specialists examined her mouth and found her teeth knocked out and cracked in places. She had clearly bitten to defend herself. Even the woman's neck was covered with numerous scratches. She was grabbing with her hands, trying to force her attacker to let go of her. Karina did not want to die and fought hard for her life. Karina Vetrano's youngest daughter, Karina, had a variety of interests, but she especially loved writing. In 2013, she starred in a short movie by her friend and screenwriter Petros Georgiadis, which was based on a poem she had written, Paradox. In her blogs, the girl often addressed complex issues, often touching on the topics of love and the end of life. Shortly after this tragedy, new information was leaked to the media. In Princeton, Massachusetts, the body of another jogger was found among the tall grass. The woman, apparently also out for a walk in a secluded place, suffered a similar fate. At first glance, the cases were identical. Could there be another serial offender in America? The case was taken up by geneticists, who were tasked with comparing DNA samples collected from the crime scenes. As luck would have it, unidentified samples were found on both victims. Contrary to police expectations, the analysis revealed no connection between the crimes. It turned out that the DNA samples belonged to different people. Particularly intriguing is the story surrounding the DNA material taken from under her fingernails, on her back, and from Karina Vetrano's phone. The DNA was found in small quantities, but was deemed sufficient for analysis by experts. For a long time, this DNA remained the only lead in the investigation, giving a chance to identify the perpetrator. It is known that most life-ending crimes are committed by someone close to the victim, so the police could not dismiss any possibility. For this purpose, the victim's father provided his DNA as he was the one who first discovered his daughter's body. However, the timing for this procedure was poorly chosen. It took place on the day of Karina's funeral. Later, all of the woman's relatives also underwent a DNA test, which did not give any matches. Detectives decided to interview Karina's relatives and friends, finding out if Mrs. Vetrano had any enemies or ill-wishers. It turned out that there were none. Everyone respected and loved her. Then the investigators developed a new version. The deed was committed from base motives. Someone met the beautiful Karina in a secluded place and attacked her, giving in to base motives. At a loss, the investigation sought the public's help by offering a $10,000 reward for information that could lead to the perpetrator. The initiative received a widespread response. Detectives explored some 250 leads, conducted 600 genetic tests, and compiled more than 1,700 reports, all to no avail. It seemed that the perpetrator had not committed crimes before, at least not been caught for them, which further complicated the investigation. On August 31st, 2016, a utility worker approached the police station with some information. At the time of Miss Vetrano's death, he was in a restricted area of the park and saw a man emerge from the bushes who then ran in a northerly direction. Based on his testimony, the New York Police Department developed and distributed a sketch of the suspect in December 2016. However, it took into account that the person depicted in the sketch could have been a passerby who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Unfortunately, the release of the sketch of the suspected perpetrator provided no new information, and the investigation reached another long stalemate. On December 4th, 2016, the Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the investigation into the death of Karina Vetrano. Initially, they developed a psychological profile of the perpetrator. According to FBI experts, the individual was very familiar with the area, especially the park where the incident occurred, suggesting the possibility that the assailant lived or continues to live nearby. However, fearing capture, he now avoids the area. It was clear he understood that the quiet, partially overgrown territory was ideal for concealing his act. Based on this theory, the police conducted screenings among local African American men, but this did not yield the desired result. Chanel Lewis's life didn't particularly stand out from other young African American individuals. He lived in one of Brooklyn's low-income housing complexes, about 4-5 miles from Spring Creek Park. Unemployed, Chanel lived with his mother, 3 sisters, and their children. Perhaps the only detail that set him apart was his diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. Nonetheless, This didn't prevent him from graduating from a private school for students with emotional and behavioral issues. Former classmates remembered Chanel as a quiet loner. The kids constantly picked on him, one of them shared. Girls even intimidated and punched him. He had no friends. Another peer mentioned that Lewis sometimes fought back, but not effectively. He was often ridiculed for his clothing and appearance. Chanel always wore a hoodie and would smirk and walk away in difficult situations, earning him the nickname African Lizard. However, a fellow student, 17-year-old Danielle Nunes, described Chanel as a smart kid with good grades. "He'd like to show me funny videos on the bus," she recalled. "I never saw him be cruel." Some sources reported that the young man once claimed he wanted to cut all the girls, asking during his time in middle school, "What happens if I bring a knife to school?" Dr. Edward Dana, the executive director of the school to which Chanel was transferred, commented on this. "We received no reports of threats in middle school. During his time at our school, he had no disciplinary sanctions. I never heard him make threatening statements towards other students." Nonetheless, Chanel was a traumatized teenager who often experienced bullying. He dreamed of working in social services, wanting to help those in distress. When conflicts arose at home, he would wander the streets, frequently visiting the park. Lewis had several minor encounters with the police, 2 for violations in Spring Creek and 1 for urinating in public. In May 2016, another incident occurred when a local merchant reported Lewis for loitering in his store with a crowbar. Responding officers checked Chanel's ID and released him, as he had no prior incidents. However, this information was retained by the police and would later play a crucial role in the investigation into Karina Vetrano's death. In February 2017, Detective John Russo, who was involved in the investigation, remembered something significant. He had repeatedly seen a young man in a hoodie wandering the park. John even attempted to follow him once, intrigued by the individual's behavior. The young man walked slowly, stopping for long periods in front of houses near the park, as if scouting them for potential burglaries. However, Russo lost sight of him when he contacted his colleagues by phone. The next day, following a store owner's report, a teenager matching the description came to the police's attention. 2 months into the investigation, John Russo recalled this wanderer, thinking he might have seen or heard something relevant. Investigators zeroed in on Chanel Lewis after Detective Russo took a closer look at the young man's file. Chanel's peculiarities raised interest. The police began to inquire about him among acquaintances and teachers, and information surfaced that he had allegedly expressed a desire to harm girls. This news stirred concern and suspicion. With no other leads, officers decided to focus on Lewis. It was later discovered that during the time of Karina's death, Chanel was not at home. After an argument with his family, he had gone to the park. Upon his return, his appearance was disheveled, with torn clothing and visible bruises and abrasions. His mother inquired about what had happened, and Lewis claimed he had been attacked. His account matched the timeline with a witness's description of a man fleeing the park. Additionally, on August 3, 2016, Lewis's father, a former school principal, took him to the hospital for treatment of severe wounds, most of which were cuts, and he also had an injured hand. The investigators reviewed the medical records from that day and found the story plausible. However, they saw it differently, noting similarities between the events involving Chanel Lewis and Karina Vetrano. On February 4, 2017, Chanel was brought to the police station and voluntarily provided his DMA for analysis. Would a perpetrator willingly do this? Detectives wondered. The interrogation began on the morning of February 5th. Lewis admitted that he was indeed in the park around 5 p.m. on August 2, 2016, but clarified he was walking on dirt paths, not through the thickets, and listening to music. He confessed to encountering a young woman jogging with her phone in her hand. When asked by detectives if something happened when he encountered her, Chanel nodded and quietly said, "Yes." Everyone was stunned. His response was vague, indicating confusion. "I was angry. One thing led to another. What happened? happened," he finally stated clearly. Investigators were skeptical of this semi-admission, fearing it might provoke doubt among jurors during a trial. They waited for Chanel to elaborate. "I was walking in the park, trying to distract myself from a family argument. Then I met a woman. She was alone. I decided to follow her. When she passed by me, I grabbed her shoulders, threw her to the ground, and hit her face about 5 times so she couldn't scream. My punches knocked out several of her teeth, injuring my hand," Chanel recalled. He also added that the struggle lasted about 5 minutes. Miss Vetrano fiercely resisted, scratching and biting. To avoid attracting attention, Lewis dragged her from the path into tall grass, where he attempted to undress and assault her. She was shocked, but continued to resist. Chanel then forcefully strangled her until he realized she was no longer alive. When asked if he knew the victim beforehand, he replied, "I did not know her before this. It all happened by chance." The motive for the act became even more unexpected and bizarre. It turns out, loud music played by a neighborhood gang member for hours on end triggered Chanel's hatred and uncontrollable aggression. These negative emotions were unleashed on the unfortunate woman, a strange reason for an act indeed. Investigators' confusion was dispelled when DNA comparison results matched perfectly. Microscopic traces found on the victim's body and phone belonged to Chanel. Consequently, the police and the prosecutor concluded the case was solved and ready for court. However, the motive still seemed implausible. It's possible Chanel had noticed Karina before, as he often frequented the park and might have seen her with her father. He liked her and decided to approach her. But after being rejected, he became angry and struck her, and the situation spiraled out of control. This scenario would have been more understandable. On November 5, 2018, the trial against Chanel Lewis began. Despite his earlier statements to the authorities, Lewis pleaded not guilty, a stance echoed by his family, denying his involvement in the crime. The prosecution charged Lewis with ending a life and sexual assault, facing him with a sentence ranging from 25 years to life imprisonment. The debate over Lewis's guilt not only unfolded in the courtroom, but also spilled over into the media. Lewis's defense team stirred the pot, pointing out alleged legal violations during his arrest. Along with various news outlets, they claimed racial bias and discrimination. However, the judge dismissed these allegations as baseless, emphasizing that the investigation complied with legal standards. The prosecution presented tangible evidence and DNA analysis findings. The defense argued that the evidence was insufficient and contaminated, given the large number of people at the crime scene, including the victim's father, who discovered her body. Forensic biologist Linda Razzano stated the odds of the DNA belonging to someone other than Lewis were 1 in 6 trillion. The prosecutor also introduced Lewis's phone records, revealing his internet searches on second chances and forgiveness in Catholicism, prompting the question, what sin was Chanel hoping to atone for? The release of Lewis's confession video sparked further controversy, with his lawyers arguing he was under immense pressure, leading to a coerced confession. They suspected the police of fabricating evidence, claiming the recording began only after Lewis was pressured, and that the search of his home violated protocols. The defense suggested the investigation into Karina Vetrano's death was initially botched, with public pressure mounting for an arrest leading to Lewis becoming a scapegoat. The jury was struck by the defense's powerful arguments. After hearing both sides, they were unable to reach a conclusive verdict. On November 21, 2018, the judge declared a mistrial, with a retrial initially scheduled for January 22, 2019, but later postponed to March 2019. After 5 hours of deliberation, Chanel Lewis was ultimately found guilty of Karina Vetrano's death and sentenced to life without parole on July 23, 2019. The defense's delay tactics included citing an anonymous source to allege misconduct by a juror, suggesting jury pressure and a conspiracy, with some calling the trial a lynch mob. The case, seemingly straightforward at first, ignited widespread prejudices and fears in society. Karina Vetrano's death touched many, serving as a grim reminder for women to be cautious. Did justice prevail? In any case, a young woman's life was cut short, and Chanel Lewis was sentenced to life imprisonment. Both families lost their children. The hope remains that the truth was indeed uncovered. Otherwise, an innocent man is behind bars while the perpetrator remains free. Australia is one of the most magical places on Earth. It's the smallest continent, a land of eternal summer with unique flora and fauna. Its very location is unique. Australia is the only country in the world that occupies an entire continent. Many people dream of this enchanting country, isolated from the rest of the world, as a place to chase their dreams. But in our story, one grand dream was not meant to come true. On March 5th, 2021, Jasmine Kaur finished her work shift and headed to the car park. A young man approached her and called her aside. Jasmine knew him, so she followed without fear. The next moment, he grabbed her by the neck with his strong hand and forcefully placed her in a nearby car. Jasmine resisted. She tried to scream and asked to be let go, but the choking pressure on her neck cut off her oxygen. She went limp, and the abductor placed her in the car. He hurriedly got behind the wheel and drove away. 18-year-old Jasmine came to Australia from India in pursuit of her dream. After her father's tragic death, she dreamed of becoming a nurse to help people. She wanted to obtain a quality medical education. With her mother's blessing, she joyfully accepted her aunt and uncle's offer to move to Australia. Thus, she settled in Adelaide with her close relatives and successfully enrolled in university. Studying was hard due to the heavy workload, but Jasmine was persistent and goal-oriented, never straying from her dream. She never missed a lecture, read mountains of textbooks, and helped her classmates with notes. Thanks to her perseverance, she earned the respect of her professors and became a role model for her peers. Jasmine Kaur's relentless determination not only allowed her to study, but also to find a job to gain practical experience. 2 years into her studies, Jasmine Kaur landed a student nurse position at the Southern Cross Homes Hospital in Plympton North, a suburb of Adelaide. At a university social event, Jasmine met Tarakjot Singh. The two quickly struck up a friendship. Both being from India, they had a lot in common to talk about. Tarakjot Singh came from an ordinary Indian family. After finishing school with flying colors, he aimed for a better education and moved to Australia to pursue a bachelor's degree in information technology. A kind and empathetic young man, he studied hard and worked to afford a comfortable living in the bustling city. The young people spent a lot of time together, hanging out at work and catching up at cafes between university lectures. Over time, their friendship blossomed into a romantic relationship. By April 2020, the young couple was no longer hiding their relationship and started planning a future together. Jasmine was smitten with Tarakjot's attention and care. He continuously expressed his devotion and love. Initially, it seemed like he was just very caring, but gradually his attentiveness became more intrusive. Tarakjot started inquiring about Jasmine's every move, justifying it by saying he was concerned for her well-being. Secretly, he began checking whom she was interacting with on social media, and then started demanding reports on her every step. Jasmine felt that Tarakjot's behavior had crossed all boundaries, but he managed to convince her every time that his total control was purely out of love and care. He would apologize and promise not to invade her personal space without reason, but these were just empty promises. Over time, Jasmine felt increasingly suffocated in her relationship with Tarakjot. He strongly opposed her interactions with family and friends. This isolation deeply hurt her, leading Jasmine to make a crucial decision to end the relationship and free herself from the pressure. With her family's support, Jasmine informed Tarakjot that she was ending their relationship. He reacted with fury, screaming, cursing, and threatening retribution against her family. Jasmine was emotionally drained. She took leave and went to stay with her mother in India. But even there, Tarakjot did not leave her alone. From afar, he used emotional blackmail, threatening to end his life. Tarakjot took drastic measures to capture his ex-girlfriend's attention. At one point, he attempted to end his life by consuming several packs of sleeping pills, recording the act and sending the video to Jasmine, hoping to elicit pity and compassion. However, his plan backfired, and instead of winning her back, he ended up in the hospital under medical care. After receiving the necessary therapy, Tarek Jot returned to his job and studies. It appeared he had accepted the breakup with Jasmine and started a new life without her. But on March 6, 2021, Jasmine Kaur did not show up for work. As evening fell and darkness enveloped the streets, a car swiftly made its way through the city, adeptly avoiding surveillance cameras. After an hour's drive, the car came to a stop. The young man exited and helped the girl out. She was weak from the prolonged lack of oxygen. With cold efficiency, he retrieved tape and a cable from the trunk. Without a word, and with brute cruelty, he sealed her mouth and eyes with the tape, causing her eyelashes to stick together and pulling tightly on the delicate skin of her face. Then, the man tied her hands behind her back. She writhed in fear. Silence. There was nowhere to run. He pushed her, and when she fell, he tied her legs with the same cable. The victim moaned and squirmed on the dusty road. Her long, dark hair tangled, and her clothes became dirty. After binding her legs, he grabbed her hair and with a swift slash cut across her throat. The victim went silent. He placed the knife in a bag and carelessly lifted the immobilized girl off the ground into the trunk. Closing the lid, he lit a cigarette. He took a few puffs before getting back into the car to continue his drive. He drove through the evening and all night. Only in the early morning did his car stop at Death's Peak. The man dug a shallow grave, removed the victim from the trunk, and laid her in the ground. Thus, the young woman was buried alive by her abductor. But she was still alive. Her eyes didn't see the horror of her situation. Lying in the cold earth, trying to breathe, her nostrils filled with fine sand, the weight of the soil pressing down on her, she was unable to move. Fear and the realization of complete helplessness took over her mind. She could only moan, briefly, then she fell asleep, forever. So easily and simply, one person decided they had the right to determine another's fate. But evil must and will be punished. On March 6, 2021, Jasmine Kaur did not show up for work at the Southern Cross Care elderly home in North Plimpton, where she worked as a nurse without any prior warning. Her supervisor contacted her family. On the same day, she was declared missing. A search began. Surveillance footage from that evening was reviewed, but there was nothing that could aid the investigation in finding Jasmine Kaur. The last time the young nursing student was seen was leaving her job at Southern Cross Homes in Plimpton North around 10 p.m. on March 5th. Tarek Jot Singh quickly became the prime suspect with a motive, especially since Jasmine had filed a harassment complaint against him with the police just weeks before her disappearance. When first questioned by police on March 6th, Singh claimed he couldn't remember the last time he saw Jasmine Kaur and insisted he was at home on the night of her death. The following day, Singh informed the officers that Jasmine had taken her own life and that he had buried her in the Flinders Ranges. He led the police to the burial site, where they discovered Jasmine's shoes, glasses, and work ID badge in a trash bin, along with zip ties. She was exhumed 2 days after Tarek Jot Singh was interrogated by the police at Morialta Creek, 40 kilometers north of Hawker, approximately 100 meters from the road and nearly a 5-hour drive from the location he allegedly took her. Tarek Jot Singh was arrested and held in custody pending trial. Investigators determined that in the days leading up to her disappearance, Tarek Jot Singh had meticulously prepared for the abduction and death of the young woman. It was found that on the day of the kidnapping, Singh had purchased zip ties, tape, and rope from a hardware store. Searches conducted at the residence where Tarek Jot lived uncovered several SIM cards and phones, proving that he had carefully planned the abduction, even going as far as changing his SIM card to fabricate an alibi. On the night of the abduction, Singh switched cars with his apartment neighbor and asked him to cover his shift, then headed to the elderly home where Jasmine was working that day. Initially, Singh was charged with failing to report a death to the coroner before the charge was upgraded to homicide. Following the investigation, 21-year-old Tarakjot Singh from Karalta Park was charged with the homicide of 21-year-old Jasmine Kaur after her body was found buried at Morialta Creek. Singh first appeared via video link before the Port Augusta Magistrates Court on March 9th, where Judge Gregory Fisher ordered the accused's name and face to be withheld for 30 days. In July 2021, hearings in the Jasmine Court case began under Judge Adam Kimber in the Supreme Court. It emerged during the hearings that Singh was in Australia on a student visa and had spent time in a short-term psychiatric ward that year. Prosecutors told the Supreme Court that 21-year-old Jasmine Kaur was assassinated a month after she reported her ex-partner Tarakjot Singh for stalking her. Singh pleaded guilty to the of Jasmine Kaur in March 2021, and the details of his crime were outlined during the sentencing. Prosecutor Carmen Mateo stated that Jasmine Kaur endured absolute terror after Singh abducted her from her workplace in Adelaide on March 5, 2021. The court heard Jasmine Kaur suffered an extraordinary level of cruelty after her former boyfriend kidnapped her, bound her with tape and zip ties, and buried her alive with her eyes bound and conscious at Death's Peak, near Hawker in the Flinders Ranges. Evidence provided by the pathologist who conducted Jasmine's autopsy indicated that Singh made superficial cuts to her throat, but these did not cause her death. An autopsy report presented showed Jasmine Kaur died on March 6, 2021, several hours after being buried. Horrific details emerged during the sentencing at the Supreme Court. Prosecutor Carmen Mateo stated she had to be acutely aware of her hopeless situation, and she must have consciously suffered from what can only be described as absolute terror. Mateo also mentioned that the act was inefficient, and Jasmine Kaur was made to suffer. It is unknown when her throat was cut, unknown when and how she ended up in that grave or was placed there, and unknown when she was dug out, other than the accusation suggests that it must have happened while she was still alive and being prepared for burial. During the initial investigation into Jasmine Kaur's death, Tarakjot denied any wrongdoing, continuously asserting that she took her own life. However, Judge Adam Kimber stated that Singh prepared a series of calculated steps over a certain period of time to commit the crime. Prosecutor Carmen Mateo informed the court that Miss Kaur had filed a police report claiming that Tarakjot Singh was stalking her on February 9th, about a month before she was assassinated. She said that Singh began cold and clinical planning of Miss Kaur's death after their relationship ended. The manner in which Jasmine Kaur was murdered indeed involved an extraordinary level of cruelty, she added. Martin Anders, the attorney representing Singh's interests, stated that 2 months before the tragic incident, the Singh and Kaur families had a meeting that resulted in a negative decision regarding the continuation of their relationship. He also mentioned that Singh's reasoning was seriously impaired following the end of their relationship. This is not someone who was really well-grounded in terms of understanding what desires were at play, how these issues evolved, and how he might have properly reasoned in the circumstances he faced. The lawyer explained, he took actions that destroyed not only her life, but his own. Martin Anders commented on Singh's deteriorating mental health and is experiencing hallucinations following Jasmine Kaur's demise. However, a psychiatric evaluation concluded that Tarakjot Singh was fully sane at the time, and he was charged with assassination. During the sentencing, the court heard about several messages Singh wrote, but never sent to Jasmine in the days leading up to her death. These messages contained statements such as, "Your bad luck that I'm still alive, just wait and see. Every one of them will get an answer, and deep inside what I feel but can't overcome." The prosecution informed the court that Singh downloaded a map of surveillance cameras across Adelaide the day before abducting Jasmine. Miss Mateo said that surveillance footage showed Singh purchasing zip ties from a hardware store on the afternoon of the abduction. She also mentioned that Singh removed the SIM card from his phone, placed it in another device, and left it at his home to engage cell towers that would create the impression he was at or near his home. He punished her, a defenseless, innocent girl, for rejecting him, she said. According to the prosecution, he forced her into the car, kept her on the back seat or in the trunk, took her a significant distance, ended her life, buried her, and disposed of any evidence that could implicate him in this crime. Judge Kimber sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. His lawyer described the act as a crime of passion and appealed for a more lenient sentence, but the request was denied. Relatives of Jasmine, who was buried alive, were present during the sentencing. In her statement, Jasmine's mother welcomed the verdict. "Today I don't feel happy. I wish I wasn't making this statement and that Jasmine was still here with me," she said. Rashpal Kaur told the court she is haunted by the thought of what her daughter Jasmine Kaur experienced in her final moments. "I go through the terrible sequence of events, wondering when she realized she was in mortal danger," the statement read. "There was no one to save her. She spent her last hour on this earth with the worst of humanity. Jasmine is gone, and I am devastated with grief. She was a precious little girl." Rashpal Kaur stated that Singh was obsessed with Jasmine, who had rejected him 100 times. "She lost her life because Tarak Jat wanted to force her into marriage and force her into a relationship with him," she said. Mrs. Kaur stated she would never forgive Singh for what he had done. "Justice has prevailed, and I cannot express our relief. We welcome the sentence, but what I can say is that my family and I have already begun serving a life sentence, and we will have to spend the rest of our lives without Jasmine." Jasmine's employer and those she cared for described her as a beautiful soul who was kind, sweet, and attentive. Thus, 21-year-old Indian student Tarak Jat Singh, who abducted his former girlfriend, 21-year-old Jasmine Kaur, from a South Australian nursing home where she worked in North Plympton, Adelaide, in March 2021, was sentenced to life in prison for a term of no less than 23 years without the possibility of parole. He bound her with tape and zip ties and then buried her while she was still conscious at Death's Peak near Hawker in the Flinders Ranges. Singh, who was 20 at the time, initially pleaded not guilty to the crime against Miss Kaur, but changed his plea a month before the trial in the Supreme Court. Judge Adam Kimber ordered Singh to serve a sentence of 22 years and 10 months without the possibility of parole, just slightly more than the mandatory minimum term for ending someone's life in South Australia, which is 20 years. While rendering the verdict, Judge Adam Kimber described the crime as horrific and extremely heartless, stating he was at a loss for words to describe the terror of Miss Jasmine Kaur's final moments. "The terror she must have felt when she was abducted, tied up and held in the car during the long drive to Morallen Creek is hard to fathom," said Judge Kimber. "I cannot describe the horror that Miss Kaur must have felt when she realized that you were burying her alive." The court heard that Singh did not reveal details about how he abducted Miss Kaur from her workplace or what he did with her in the subsequent hours. However, Judge Kimber stated there was clear evidence that she suffered greatly and was forced to endure a long car ride while bound and gagged. After the sentence was announced, Judge Adam Kimber said it was clear that the crime was premeditated and that Singh took steps to conceal his horrific actions. "The enormity of what you did must have been clear to you," said the judge. "There was time to reflect. There was time to step back from the plan. Yet you proceeded and ended Miss Kaur's life." Judge Adam Kimber told Singh that he was beyond any reasonable doubt satisfied that the criminal was only concerned about himself. "You ended Miss Kaur's life to punish her for her unwillingness to maintain a relationship with you and for turning to the police," he stated. The police had warned Singh about stalking in early February 2021, less than a month before the crime. During the sentencing, the court heard that Singh wrote several messages to Miss Kaur in the days before her death, which were never sent. At the trial, a statement Jasmine Kaur wrote to the police just 5 weeks before her death was read, detailing how her overly possessive perpetrator persistently followed her in the street and at her workplace. In the statement, signed January 28, 2021, Miss Kaur disclosed that she had been in a controlling relationship with Singh for about 9 months. "He was overly possessive and wanted to control who I spent time with," the document released by the Supreme Court stated. Miss Kaur told the police that she ended the relationship on January 4th, 2021, but Singh took it badly. He stated that I had to be with him, or else he would try to end his own life, she said. During their relationship, she mentioned Singh would sometimes get upset if she planned to go out with friends, calling her and demanding she come home. Singh, a citizen of India who came to Australia to study information technology at a university and who also worked at a nursing home, is likely to be deported once he is released from prison. Tarakjot Singh will be about 40 years old when he becomes eligible to apply for parole in January 2044. Jasmine Kaur became yet another victim of terror from a man, the attentive, sensitive, and kind. Tarakjot Singh, whom she loved and trusted, turned out to be a wolf in sheep's clothing, and his pathological jealousy and emotional instability cost her her life. A person who truly loves can never harm their beloved. They would take any blow upon themselves. In the case of Tarakjot, there's no right answer. Some may see in this story an insult, some incompetence, and others might consider the guy a psychopath. But looking at Jasmine's story, one can learn, at the cost of her mistakes, to prevent themselves and their loved ones from making similar ones in the future. Jasmine Kaur's case is a heart-wrenching story of toxic obsession and crime that shook the Australian backcountry, following the disastrous end triggered by the boyfriend's reprehensible behavior.